For those who are joining us now, let me remind you of our fun competition. The fun competition is, I'm going to start by trying to position people. We will not be able, given the time available, to do introductions. You will understand that if we give even 13 people 2 or 3 minutes each to introduce themselves, that will take close to 45 minutes, and we only have 2 hours for the session. So I thought maybe just to introduce some human element to this somewhat, not completely, but somewhat sort of unhuman technology, I'm going to ask by means of a competition to the group who would be the furthest away from the point where I'm currently sitting. We're sitting across the country and actually across the world. But it will be interesting to just establish, if you take Belleville as the center point of the earth, which it is not, then perhaps it could be interesting to see who would be in a concentric circle the furthest removed from where I'm currently sitting, which is in Belleville. So while you're listening to me, think about more or less the distance from Belleville, which is 20 kilometers from Cape Town in South Africa, to where you currently are, so that we can start with that fun competition. All right, we're up to 13 people now. I'm still expecting at least 4 or 5 more. The start time formally is 4 o'clock. We shall not start late. We will allow people in as we go along. In the meantime, you will see that I've shared with you the start of the presentation, which is premised upon, built upon what I call the Erwin Schwella leadership model, but I do qualify that. This is a leadership model which I compiled through a very fortunate immersion into leadership conversations and leadership cases over many years, and through conversations with people such as yourselves. So you have all been part of the co-creation of this particular model. You don't have to take any responsibility, however, for any weaknesses in the model. You can take credit for some of the strengths. For the weaknesses, I will stand in myself. There it is. You will see it is called the Erwin Schwella leadership model, but it is much, much more than Erwin Schwella. It is, as I say, a serious attempt to try to compile some insights into leadership, which I've been able to gather from people like yourselves. And today will be another opportunity. We will hone, build, emerge, evolve the model continuously through this process of co-creation, which is creating things together, which is a very fascinating part of what we do in knowledge business. Maybe on the point of knowledge, while we're waiting still, knowledge is a fascinating commodity. I've been very fortunate also to have been involved for many years in what might be called the knowledge space, because it's more than a place. The knowledge space, and knowledge as a commodity is fascinating in the sense that it's the only commodity that I know of, but I stand to be corrected, the only commodity which grows when you use it. Oil, maize, any other commodity in a very lesser amount, even gold will in some ways be used, whereas knowledge and then be depleted over years. Whereas knowledge grows, the more you use knowledge, the more you benefit and it grows. The second thing is, the more you share knowledge, the better it becomes and the more useful it becomes. So that is also another fascinating perspective. what we try to do here is to be knowledge-based. It is now 3:59. We're up to 13 participants. And I promise that at 4 o'clock we will start the substantive discussion, but we will start with our little competition. And that competition is to place the person who is the furthest away from Bellville, which is 20 kilometers away from South Africa currently. So while you're thinking about that, when we start at 4 o'clock, then maybe the person or people who think they are the furthest away should just give an indication by raising their hands and saying, listen, I think where I am currently, which might be in Gauteng, like Enos, or in Somerset West, like Yansi, or in Paarl, like Oki, or in Bloemfontein, like Sanet.
Well, Erwin, I'm afraid I'm hard to be beaten. I'm afraid, and I apologize.
Okay, I thought, Silvio, you would come in and exactly at 4 o'clock. So Silvio, you will stay where you are.
I apologize to Felicity. I think I'm afraid I'm a bit further out than Germany, which is Romania. So.
Well done, well done.
Felicity, apologies. Yes.
So Silvio, just give an indication again of where you are exactly sitting now.
Timișoara in Romania.
Timișoara in Romania.
Yes.
Fascinating country for leadership studies, because it's a country in transition towards transformation, coming from a particular political history like South Africa. So there are many, many interesting comparisons one can make between Romania, as we have so elegantly done in the past, Silvio. Professor Rogobete is a chair of a academic department at the University of Timișoara, and also an honorary professor at Stellenbosch University, to which I introduced him. We've had long conversations. We can have more conversations. Thanks for being with us, Silvio.
Thank you very much, Erwin. Great honor and pleasure.
Yeah, there is also a colleague whom you refer to, maybe you know, perhaps the second furthest, and then we'll conclude the game. We don't want to spend too much time on that. From Germany is our colleague from Germany. Can you just sort of unmute and appear as if by magic from Germany? Let me just get the name again. It's our colleague from the Diakonische Hochschule in Bielefeld.
Yeah.
Okay, there you are. Could you kindly just quickly talk to us and unmute and on video if it's possible?
Yeah, it's me, Felicity, representing the Institute for Diachronic Management
in Bielefeld. And my apologies, you know, I would generally like to know everybody's name, and that happens in the second class. But for now, if you could, we've introduced Professor Rogobete. Silvio, maybe if you could just briefly say something, although you are just a short second in terms of I think, distance from here.
My name is Felicité Ningtedem. I come from Cameroon, but I am now based in Germany studying. I am one of the students enrolled in the PhD course of Diachronic Management for the Institute of Diachronic Management. And I'm also working as the academic assistant of Professor Martin Buscher, whom you know, and he's very busy today in a meeting, and we wanted to be part of this session, so that is why I stepped in.
Yeah. Okay, so there you are. There we've got the two winners. I wish I could give you a good bottle of South African wine, or maybe a grape juice if you prefer. However, that's not possible with this particular mode of conversation. Mm-hmm. We are now at 4:03, and we will start the formal part of this particular session. First of all, for those of you who may have in some ways lost track with me, which happens when one is not in each other's company every day. I finished a term of 37 years at Stellenbosch University, where I established the School of Public Leadership and left at the end of 2018, took emeritus status. Retirement is not a word that features in my vocabulary at all. I took emeritus status. I still then had an appointment at the School of Law of Tilburg University in the Netherlands as professor of law, but specializing in public leadership. That's interesting. That can be done in Europe. And last year, I was also given emeritus status there, which means I'm still working with those universities, but I'm currently setting up a School of Social Innovation at Hugenote Kollege, and we link to that also a Center for Good Governance in Africa, as well as two further initiatives, a cross-cutting initiative where we want to build a mass movement in South Africa, but also across the globe, called the #Integritas movement. Our basic approach there is that integrity is dignity, corruption kills. And we should be spending time on engaging with integrity in a serious and committed way. And especially in South Africa, a country in transition, I was just watching some footage on the Zondo Commission again. And I had a radio interview this afternoon on South African National Radio on some of the aspects of the Zondo Commission. So, and then we also have the Center for Good Governance in Africa, the #Integritas movement, and also recently affiliated. Some people are still joining, so I'll just admit them. All right, still people joining us, up to 16 participants now. We've affiliated an entity called the Institute for Technology and Society, where we want to look at technology and how it applies to society, because it seems as if there might be somewhat of a misunderstanding that technology is about machines, and if you go into fourth industrial revolution type of aspects, it is about machine learning, it's about big data, which it is also, but it is not very valuable if it doesn't in some way serve the purpose of people. So we work with social innovation, and therefore that is my context, leadership for social innovation. We are currently developing a course at Hugenote, a postgraduate diploma course, which is our postgraduate diploma course is a course which we call a postgraduate in leadership for social innovation and compassionate management. So the combination of leadership, social innovation, and compassion. We believe that it is important that we should bring humans back and that the humanity should feature. So those are the types of things that we are involved with. And this particular one or 2 hour, actually 2 hours introduction is then to ideas of leadership. This will be followed up also by a formal course, which is part of our postgraduate diploma, which is to be held from next week, the 10th, where we will actually teach 3 Zoom sessions of 4 hours and a very strong leadership course. For those of you who might be interested in still joining us for that, if you are not completely put off by today, you might be interested in doing that. You can still let us know. I will share an email address with you where you can contact us if you are interested in perhaps coming in for that course as well. Okay. Also, final point about our postgraduate diploma, which is currently under consideration with the Council for Higher Education in South Africa for accreditation. I call it the MBA for social entrepreneurship, social innovation, and social as a postgraduate diploma, it approximates the coursework will definitely be grad school work, and then there will be a research part to it, and we will probably not call it an MBA, but probably call it an MPhil. That is our developmental path over the next 3 to 4 years. It takes time to do these things, but that is an aspiration that we have. Now, let's get to some of the course substance again. First of all, I would like to ask you 4 or 5 questions just to focus you on some interrogation of what we actually are going to deal with today as we go along. And these questions, if you can just jot them down or note them on your computers, is the first one. And I would like you to perhaps consider the questions as we go along in order for you to provide an answer when we have a conversation, so that we open up the conversation around these questions. And the first question is the question, does leadership really matter? Basically, four words. Does leadership really matter? Right, so intuitively, I think most of you will say yes. But are there conditions where leadership just do not make it? What happens under conditions of crisis, for example? Second question is a very classical question in leadership literature, maybe sometimes a bit overworked already by now. And this is the old question, are leaders born? So first question, does leadership matter? Second question, are leaders born? Third question, is leadership better than management? Fourth question, which is an open-ended question. The question is, strong leadership requires of leaders to, and then colon, what do we require when we talk about strong leadership? So you will probably have ideas about that. I'm actually sure you have ideas about that. We all often call on public media or in our conversations, what we need now is strong leadership. What does it mean? Is it always useful? What does it mean? And then maybe the last one is, can we learn anything from bad leadership? Is there any value in looking at bad leadership? We all tend to focus on good leadership, and correctly so. But is there anything of value in contemplating, thinking about learning from bad leadership? So let me just repeat the 5 questions. Does leadership matter? While we talk, maybe you should think about that and see if you can come up with an answer. It's not only yes or no. Yes, no, why? Are leaders born? Yes or no? Why do you say that? Leadership is better than management. Yes or no? Why do you say that? A more open-ended question, strong leadership requires of leaders too. How would you describe strong leadership? And then the 5th question, there is nothing to learn from bad leadership. Okay, those questions, if you've got them, they are therefore set up to get you thinking. So then maybe if we can just look at this leadership model, and I did include here, and I hope it will work. Dion will help me if it doesn't. Just an overview. Now, Dion, I have to share this new share screen, hey? Or can you see it on the screen already? Share, new share?
Yeah, it works. It's okay.
Okay, I've actually succeeded. You can give me the first round of applause. I generally get completely tied up with fluctuating between, you know, talking and thinking what I'm going to say, which, by the way, my wife often says I don't often do. I don't often think what I'm saying, but in any case, and then having to move through the technology. So this is basically a summary of what is then also captured in the 7 pages of the leadership text that I sent you, and is also built out and broadened when we talk about our resources in the other document, and which we will also cover in much greater depth during the course, which starts next week in March. And with this particular technology, the interesting thing is we now have at least 3 or 4 people from other continents over and above the African continent. We've got people from the African continent, but everybody can join this way of teaching if you would be interested. All right, so now I must just see, how do I actually move, how I move this particular slide. So by means of an introduction and orientation, I will start to say that context matters in leadership. Context does have an impact, especially if you work in complex contexts, as opposed to working in fairly stable and even complicated, but let's say fairly simple contexts. If you're working in a complex context, then it is very important that you have a very good idea of what that context means. And we will elaborate somewhat on that. The second point, and you will see I like alliteration. The second point is we are faced in leadership with challenges. These challenges represent opportunities to innovate and to use leadership and social innovation to change these challenges. And I always say, just to add a bit of humor, challenges are actually frogs that can be turned into princes. You just have to be willing to kiss them. You must engage with the challenge. It doesn't happen by itself. It takes a bias for action, and it takes a serious commitment to deal with the challenges. Concepts contribute. By that I mean is that an ounce of good theory is worth a ton of perspiration. I know there's often this notion that leadership is professional, applied, and calls for action. But I often challenge students, and have challenged students over the years, to start thinking now. And then I add, because it might be a fascinating new experience. So thoughtful, conceptual, theoretical approaches do assist us in understanding complexity and applying the next C, competencies, which contribute to deal with leadership questions and leadership challenges. So from the concept base, where we need to be analytical, thoughtful, contemplative, strategic, we should also build a set of leadership competencies. Competencies which will then contribute to serve the purpose and to be purpose-driven leaders. Capacity is crucial. What do I mean by that? And how do I distinguish between competencies and capacity? Well, competencies, I generally, for purposes of categorization and clarity, I try to say that competencies are those individual knowledge components, skills, and attitudes which you as a leader have and have to develop, your knowledge, your skills and attitudes as an individual. So that creates individual competency. You are competent at your job. You're competent at being a leader. However, and this is a very interesting situation which I've observed in South Africa to a large extent through my experience, is that you may have the competencies, but you also need some form of capacity. And when I talk about capacity, capacity then refers not only to the individual competencies, but also to your institutional, if you look at it from a broader perspective, or organizational capacity. Let me give you some form of an example here. I was very involved before democracy. Enos will testify to that. I was involved in training leadership in exile, especially ANC leadership in exile. After democracy, I worked with the South African Police Service, which turned into a service at the time of democracy around 1994. And there were 18 commissioners appointed, and a Dutch consultant and I and a Danish consultant worked with these people for 6 weeks, not at one time, but to build competencies with them. And after that, I was also involved with lots of other police leadership training in South Africa. Now, if you talk about these people have competencies. However, what has happened is that the institutional capacity of the South African Police Service, I would submit, and it's open to debate, has over time been very diminished through a number of political issues that occurred. We have just seen again that General Jacobs, now not commissioner anymore, that's also an interesting move. After 1994, we started to build a police service that was to turn into a police force again. And this is symbolic and interesting. And the police force took back, not anymore a commissioner, but now a general again, the ranks of the military. However, here's my example. You must think about your institution and your organization, and South African institutions or Romanian institutions or Tanzanian institutions can be compared to what I call a fishbowl. A fishbowl. And what one does is, sometimes there is this idea that you can improve the working of the fishbowl ecosystem by substituting the leaders. So you take out the older fish or the less competent fish, and you put in new fish. You substitute the fish in the fishbowl. The problem is that if you substitute the fish in the fishbowl with new fish, but the water in the fishbowl is toxic, or the fishbowl is placed in a place where there is no light or oxygen, then it is very little consequence that you replace one set of fish with another set of fish, because inevitably, even whether they are competent or not, they will be impacted upon by the fact that the water is toxic. Now, I have written, and that is part of what we teach in this course, and I've written on bad public leadership, and I took as an example, it is a published article, Bad Public Leadership, the case of Jackie Selebe. Now, there might be differences of opinion about Jackie Selebe, but if you look at it, he was the commissioner of the South African Police. He was also part of returning the police from a service to a force. Sorry, please just mute your mics if you don't mind. Unless you want to shout at me because I'm talking nonsense, then please unmute your mics and shout at me. But Jackie Selebe actually became the head of Interpol. And as you know, objectively. I didn't do that. He was later on jailed for corruption for a number of years. Now that then I analyze in this case. My point here is that context matters. Institutional capacity. If you put new leaders into the same circumstances, which actually starts to worsen, then they're not going to probably make the impact that you think they will make just because you replace them. I would actually postulate a kind of closest to that I will get to an axiomatic statement under these conditions, that if you put a good leader into a toxic institutional organizational context, probabilities are better that you will turn that good leader into a bad leader than the probabilities are that you will, in actual fact, be able to change the organization from a bad organization by putting in the good leader. So that is, in actual fact, the particular dimension that we have difficulty with. So then the further point here, we will continue, is that change is constant and leadership is about learning, and finally that conversations change conditions. All right, here you now have an overview, and I've got about 4 slides here, then we'll open for a conversation. So just bear with me. You know, my old standard joke is that academics have this unique quality. They speak in other people's sleep. That is a very unique quality of academics. So I must be very careful for that. So this is leadership for the future, leadership as strategic learning. And you will see I build it around a lot of alliteration again. I like alliteration. So we've already talked about context, challenges, concepts, competencies, capacity, change, and then back into context. We have also leadership of the head, leadership of the heart, leadership of the hands. And I will elaborate slightly on this. Then we need to look at individuals in the leadership calculation as well as institutions. We've already mentioned the importance of institutions. And we must combine that with effective and ethical leadership. So we're looking for effective individual leaders and ethical institutions. We are looking for effective institutions and ethical individuals. That links then to the fact that leaders have sets of roles to play, relationships and responsibilities. And then we lead for transition and transformation. And we must lead with sensitivity and sensibility. Okay, have you got that overview? Are you thinking about the 5 questions? Does leadership matter? Are leaders born? Is leadership better than management? What is strong leadership? Is there anything that we can learn from bad leadership? Now, I'm very briefly going to touch upon this. We will be going into much more depth if you would like to join us for the 3-session course enriched by a very rich hyperlinked document, which is a resource on leadership by itself. First of all, context. You must, and you'll also find that in the 7 pages that I've written, you must scan your context in terms of the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and economic and ecological trends continuously, like a navigator or a pilot in a cockpit, or like a radiologist scanning the body on a CT scanner. You cannot do leadership without being connected to your context. So that's the first point. The second point, the challenges. The challenges relate to the fact that in South Africa, you might be planning very meticulously a new settlement to integrate cities as a municipal manager and as a councillor in charge of municipal services. And in that area that the engineers have planned, and that takes time, and where tomorrow the contractors will start to put in the services, the hard infrastructural services, by the day after tomorrow, you might have 2,000 informal settlers there. So that's a challenge. That's a reality. How do you deal with that? What does a leader do under those conditions and circumstances? Competencies, we will refer to a number of competencies which are also listed. Some competencies are about your knowledge, skills, and attitudes, but there's also a set of competencies that we really rate highly, and that is the competencies related to emotional intelligence, which goes beyond IQ. It's about being able to sense and assess, to be sensitive and sensible, which is a part of what we say in terms of leadership is about sensitivity and sensibility. Then institutional capacity, which is all about understanding that sometimes you need to work with strong hierarchy, centralized decision-making at a national level. But sometimes you must also work with a total adhocracy, where you just start a network. And the network is a form of institutionalization, which calls for a different leadership style than, for example, leading a large corporate or a large public service entity or a large municipality. And then it's all about change. Now, change, we always refer and deal with Kotter's change model, Kotter's 8-step change model, which starts with building a coalition, realizing that there's a problem, and then starting to convince people to buy in. There's a lot of fascinating material on leading change that one can deal with leadership. That covers the C's. We then have to look at leadership of the head, the heart, and the hands. Leadership of the head is all about intellectual capacity and competence. It's about analysis. It's about the concepts. It's about understanding. However, if one only has leadership of the head, leadership can become very cold, clinical, and callous. You must also combine leadership of the head with leadership of the heart. Leadership of the heart is about compassion, about care, about dealing with people with appropriate emotional intelligence, about warmth, about sympathy. You cannot only be a cold, clinical, intellectual leader, you must also have leadership of the heart, a feelings-based leadership. If you don't deal with feelings, feelings will deal with you. Then there is leadership of the hands. In South Africa, we seem to have quite a number of people who profess to be thoughtful and even conceptual or considerate and even compassionate leaders, but they have no bias for action. It seems as if, given any preferred option, they would settle for doing nothing and just enjoy the trimmings and the privileges of office. Leadership is not about enjoying the privilege of office. Leadership is not about the cars that you drive on the roads if you are a public leader. It's about the quality of the roads that you drive the car on. So leadership has to combine in a sensitive and sensible balance, leadership of the head, the heart, and the hands. Leadership is also about effective individuals and ethical institutions, and effective institutions and ethical individuals. We must look at the concepts of integrity. And if you look at that, then every leader should have a set of competencies to be effective as an individual, but also to build effective institutions. And every leader should be ethical as an individual, but also competencies to build ethical institutions. Unethical institutions, by the way, create total stress and eventually leads to death. There are now enough examples from, for example, the Zondo Commission in South Africa, of people who either contemplated or did commit self-death. So unethical institutions are toxic for people who work in them. And maybe the old guideline, ethical guideline, and there are many of these that one can use in a very brief way, but the old ethical guideline of the oath of Hippocrates is that at least do no harm. Try to not do any harm, at least, but you should do much better than that. Leadership is also about roles, relationships, and responsibilities. Sometimes as a leader, you must be an advocate. Sometimes you must be a gadfly. Sometimes you must be a troublemaker, but sometimes you must also be a peacemaker. Sometimes you must be, rather than an activist, you must also be a person who builds new sets of peaceful relationships. Sometimes the role that you have to fulfill is to be a strong thinking leader, but sometimes you also have to fulfill the role of a doer, a builder. Sometimes you have to be a policy maker, and sometimes you have to be, actually most of the time, a good policy implementer. It's also about relationships. It's about relationships with the other, and to be able to think about the other, not only to consider the self and the own. I think we have a serious lack of understanding of the other in South Africa across the board. That is why our default option still currently is to blame and to denigrate and to act with racism and to act in a derogatory way towards each other, because we actually don't have empathy for the other. And then leadership is about responsibilities, and you will see I did put down responsibilities. It's not about rights. Obviously, leaders also have rights, but you have more responsibilities than rights. Then you have to lead for sensitive situations, insensitive situations with sensitivity. That means that, you know, there are often people which say that, you know, yeah, just bear with me. I'm somebody who is a very straight talker. I say things as they are. I speak the truth, which is never a bad thing. It's always a good thing. And you will get it from me straight. And then you can be bloody rude. I have difficulty with that one because I have to manage myself in that sense continuously. So be sensitive. Be sensitive to other people's needs. Be sensitive to their circumstances. Think with empathy about the other. And also act appropriately under conditions where you have to manage yourself and manage others, and manage situations and lead situations. We also look at sensibility, which is about wise leadership. On the spectrum of knowledge, and I refer to knowledge, one starts with data, which are fractious little elements of hints about things. But if you start to think through the data and combine them, the data, you get into something which you might call information, which starts to build relationships between data. From those relationships, you can start to devise information, and then from the information, once you start to see linkages which you can test and think about and develop, then you've got, in actual fact, some form of knowledge which is validated and verified. And if you've got all that and sensitivity and sensibility through experience, then you've got wisdom. We should strive for wise leadership and common sense leadership. And by the way, one of the problems is that common sense is not so common anymore. That also creates some challenges. Finally, in this model, leadership is about not only transformation, but also about transition. Transformation refers to the idealized visionary view, inspiring people towards a better future, an improved future. The issue, and we've seen that in South Africa, if we take the Rainbow Nation, whether now discredited or not, and we might have different opinions on that, but that was a strong vision, a transformative vision. Then perhaps we missed the boat to build the flight of the flamingo scenario, where we all fly together into better places. We've missed the boat because we didn't manage the transition properly. So be very conscious of the fact that to get to there from here, you need to have a theory of transition. You need to think through not only the vision, but visualize the road. The vision gives you the exciting, inspirational, visionary set of inclusive ideas, which probably you try to share, always also difficult in a very diverse country, and that's fine. But if you don't visualize the roadmap, and plan for the road, then you're probably going to end up without padkos, and that is never a good situation to be in. All right, so there's the model. This is now just a link to that, where we try to bring innovation into the picture. And this is the Civinova's social innovation process. I must give credit to my good friend, Boy Jansen van Rensburg, Masters in Future Studies, Masters in Chemical Engineering, and currently working on a PhD on complex leadership within local government in South Africa, and that is really complex. I was privileged to be study leader until Stellenbosch University said somebody else must do it. There are always better people when you leave, so that's fine. But I still work with Boy in our PhD Athenaeum, which is a related activity that we have, where we enhance people's research capacity at the School of Social Innovation, another entity that we drive. So Boy worked very much on this ideas of contextual complexity and then leadership for innovation. And he gave me some of these inputs. I had ideas, and then came Boy and said, what about inspiration, intuition, and imagination? Where all of these create ideas which represent potential, then you can institutionalize it. And because I am somewhat averse to bureaucracy and to huge organizations, I mean, I cringe when I think about megawatt park or something like that. It just gives me an idea that perhaps there's too much power around there, but eventually there is no power around there. So it's about institutionalization through partnerships, it's about implementation through projects, and then it is finally about learning and combining all of these things to create prosperity, not profit. We work with social innovation. There are sometimes excess income over expenditure, but we do not primarily strive towards profit. Now, if you take that model, then you can see that once again, this, thanks Boy, you helped me a lot with this, from conceptual chaos through complexity emergence, complicatedness, and then concrete aspects. And on the other hand, inspiration, intuition, imagination, ideas, institutionalization, implementation, impact, and prosperity. And then you have work that gets done through the professions and all of the different role players. Not enough time to harbor too much on this point. Now, what are the steps in learning leadership for social innovation? You must imagine, you must ideate, you must implement. By the way, if you talk about imagine, ideate, implement, then you're also very close to another one of our courses, which we call leadership through human-centered design thinking, which is another one of our executive short courses, like the one on leadership, which I've already talked about, which is currently being presented, and we will repeat it as a 3 by 4 hour session with a rich resource attached to it. So imagine, ideate, envision, share, inspire, institutionalize, implement, make impact, learn, recycle, and reimagine. You will see that linked to knowledge and learning, we continuously refer back to that. And that refers to a model which I developed in co-creation with my good friend Dutch Leonard at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, where I spent 6 weeks with Dutch at one stage, co-teaching, but also being taught. And Dutch and I worked on the case study of the New York Police Department in the time of Rudy Giuliani, somewhat discredited leader now, I think, but and Bill Bratton, the police commissioner. And we wanted to understand what happened in relation to crime statistics in New York. And we came up with these 4 questions to analyze the case from a learning leadership perspective. And the first question in this action learning model is then what happened? And I cleared this with Dutch. He said, well, Erwin, I worked with you on this one, but you can use it as your model because you conceptualized this to a great extent. He did other things. So you must continuously, as a leader, ask the question, what happened? And essentially, this is an assessment of your performance. Did my crime strategy succeed or did it fail? And you can be very sophisticated. If we look at the monitoring and evaluations department within the presidency, then there are sophisticated measures on these things. Or you can just basically say it worked or it didn't work. But you must assess your performance continuously. And for that, you need empirical evidence. It's not a guesstimate. In the case of the New York Police Department, they used a process called the CompStat, comparative statistics process. Every 3 months, they got together all of the police leaders around a table. They took 7 of the most serious crimes in all of the precincts, and they compared the stats. And every time they said, what is happening here? Is the murder rate going up or down? And that is the homicide or the robbery rate going up or down. And that then led them into the following, the next question, which is, why did this happen? You then start to say, well, I see these trends. It's working, it's not working. Why is it not working? Why is it working? So if it's not working, you can learn from your failure. If it's working, you can learn from your successes. And on that basis, you start to sort out what works and what doesn't work. And essentially, in a knowledge-based learning approach here, one can say that you construct and formulate working hypotheses. And by the way, hypotheses often confuse people. A hypothesis is not a complex thing. It's basically just an assumption about the relationship between 2 things. So the assumption is that if I have bobbies on the beat, crime will go down. That's an hypothesis. And then you have to test it. That then means that you start to understand your own business. There are many people who are working, but they don't understand their own business. And that leads into learning disabilities. Often when you don't understand your own business, the learning disability that you really follow is the enemy is out there. And in actual fact, if the enemy is out there, I have no responsibility to change this myself. I'm completely helpless and hopeless. but generally you might be helpless and hopeless, but you're not harmless. You must understand what you are busy with, and you must interrogate this on a continuous basis, asking, why did this happen? What happened, and why did it happen? And then the next question is, what are the lessons? What can we learn from this? These lessons relate to improved individual competencies, such as personal mastery, team learning, systems thinking, changed mental models, and at the end, building your own emotional and other competencies. And also, the fourth question, how can I build this learning back into the system? If I start to understand and have the competencies to deal with my reasons for success or failure, then it's very obvious that you also have to revisit, in terms of continuous quality improvement approaches, the system. Is the water toxic around here? Are our rules and regulations just bogging us down to such an extent that nobody can get anything done around here? Or is this a country club where everybody can do whatever they like and there's no system or discipline? And it's not the one or the other, could be either. But you have to ask these questions in order to come to some form of a conclusion. So there then you have the basics in 50 minutes. I would like now to stop and perhaps start to get a first round of your feedback on, does leadership matter? Are leaders born or are they made? Is leadership better than management? What is strong leadership? And is there anything that we can learn from bad leadership? I'm going to remain quiet now. You can criticize me. Generally in real classrooms, physical space, this is the time when I engage people and challenge them to throw things at me. But often when I teach in physical spaces, I move quite a bit so that people don't really hit me when they throw things at me. But you can now contribute. Please, the sensible and sensitive thing now to do is to come in and say your say.
Erwin?
Yes.
Gerard Fourie.
Gerard, yes. Yeah. Good afternoon, Gerard. I'm glad that you could make it. You still had a council, or Gerard is an alderman in the city of Cape Town and a ward committee chair. Gerard, yes, please go. Thanks.
Thank you, Erwin. Yes, it's always good to link up with you again. And then I unfortunately missed the introduction, so I'm not sure who the rest of the audience, the members are. But be that as it may, it's always good to hear that there's also international colleagues that have joined us today. Erwin, yeah, I got the 5 pointers, and really I would like to just start off by saying that, is a leader born or is it made? I am strong of the opinion that it's a combination of those 2 pointers, meaning that in many instances, circumstances make give yourself in your personal capacity some direction to develop leadership skills. And as you grow into that realm in the community, you then identify with the community. The information coming through from the community makes you, in fact, a strong candidate to be a leader. And then with that capacity, with that knowledge, and with the support, and that's why I strongly believe that it's actually the community that not necessarily chooses you, but it comes as a natural direction from the community to support you in taking their points or taking their communication or taking their issues up to another level where you may have the possibility of assisting to resolve it. And then it also gives you the opportunity to develop other leaders or other members of the community to also stand up in their rightful way, to participate in a whole a team that you can then take that information and as a conglomerate, you can take that to a place where this can be resolved or this can be addressed, and where you amicably listen to each other and find a common trend whereby you can work towards a solution. Because every person or every community or every grouping may think that their position is much stronger than what the other groups are saying. That's okay. But if you look in the national situation where we find ourselves currently in South Africa, it really is that the answer is there. You mentioned when we try to address the transition period, we perhaps got that wrong. It's always harder now to go back and try and fix that in retrospect, because there's a lot of damage that have been done in South Africa and so forth. So yes, with regards to what can you learn from poor leadership? Well, that's it. From poor leadership, you will identify what the mistakes were that was made, and how perhaps you can, with the support of this leaders that you've identified or that have grown with you towards a common goal, you can address that. So that's just my thoughts, Erwin, and thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you very much for the invite. Thanks.
Okay, I'm unmuting and getting myself on screen again. I see in actual fact why I was working at presenting. A number of people already use the chat function. I've just put something on chat for you. Gerard, yes, fit for purpose and profound as always. Yes, of course. The answer is that leaders are born with some, shall we say, potential, but that can be developed. So that combination is good. And then it is of course also important to realize that leadership is about influencing people in particular ways to jointly, in a combination, work together to reach desired goals and objectives. So it's about influence, it's about destination, and it is about cooperation. And for that, your final point, the transition needs to be contemplated very seriously, because if you get it wrong, it might be very difficult to re-harvest and to re-energize around what is now or then regarded as a kind of a failure. When you start with these very ambitious and specifically, you know, transforming a country like South Africa, and there's a lot of blue sky and green field, and people are excited. That's great then. Once you've soiled it by means of bad behavior, and inevitably you need to contemplate failures. But once you've spoiled it and soiled it, then it becomes difficult to turn it around again. So sometimes taking the effort of doing it properly the first time is very useful. Thanks, Gerard, for a good input. We'll take 3 or more inputs, and then we can I get an indication after these inputs if you need a 5 to 7 minute leg stretch break? I'm quite willing to do that. Just chat to me on the chat screen. In the meantime, some more people to contribute. Please, thanks, Gerard, for your first bite at the cherry.
Erwin, if I may, from Romania, from Timișoara, just to pick up on your challenge on the fishbowl analogy.
Y-E type O-F of L-E.
Can you
I
hear
don't see
me?
what's happening now.
Oops. Can you?
Go ahead, Sylvia. Fine.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just to pick up on your analogy with the fishbowl, the context matters. You're basically saying that the context does matter. It is, yes, it is a good idea to change leaders if they are bad leaders, or to do whatever it takes to replace them. But I think you are absolutely right, and my experience in the Romanian context is the same. That if the context, if the environment is the wrong environment, it will sooner or later compromise the leadership. Very rarely good leadership will manage to survive and to survive, but let alone to be successful if the environment is poisoned and if the environment is wrong. And that leads to a very serious question of what comes first. How do we come out of this vicious circle of having a very poisoned environment that poisons everyone that goes inside, and not being able to have good leadership, and have leadership that it's not willing to, it's not capable of changing. I think what I'm learning here in Romania, it's that change of the environment takes a lot of time. I was 27 when we had our revolution against the totalitarian regime. More or less around the same time you moved into a democratic dispensation in South Africa. So in a sense, it's about 30 years ago. And I remember vividly that in our revolution in '89, I thought it's going to take about 3 to 4 years to fix things, to put things in order. I was a 27 years optimist, naive. It's 30 years now, and we are still struggling because the environment was so corrupt, so much poisoned, that it almost poisoned anything that has been touched or in touch with it. So I think it's only now that we have a new generation of leadership that has not only the knowledge but also the backup from the people from behind them that will bring serious, significant change. And I think the lesson I'm saying here, what I learned myself, and I think it is in a sense similar in South Africa, it takes time. Change takes time. Changing the environment takes even more time. So definitely we need to focus on both, not only on bringing up and building good leadership, but also doing whatever it takes to change the context, to clean the waters, to return to your fishbowl analogy, to make the environment lively and livable and positive and as it should be for the fish to flourish. I think we should concentrate on both. It's not enough to have good leadership programs if you don't have very good community programs at the same time, if you don't have educational programs at the same time, if you don't deal with the masses, with those who at the end of the day will raise their hand or will put the vote ballot. And if they don't understand what's going on, they will perpetuate, they'll be manipulated, and they'll perpetuate continuously the poisoned waters. And it will be very difficult for poor leaders who really want to change something, that they cannot. I have lots of friends in leadership positions. I am myself in a leadership position in many respects. And I see very often that it is so difficult to change things because at the end of the day, you face the masses. Just to give us very banal, in a sense, example of local schools where you want to introduce change, you have some smart people, educators, and then they are hit by the parents who don't want to change. No, don't teach my child to be disrespectful, calling you by your name, by calling you Erwin. He should know that in the school he has to be disciplined and has to say sir and mister and, you know, these kind of things. Very, very, very often that they seem to be banal, but at the same time you can see that there is opposition. They look at minor things and they turn. So to cut it short, I think if we want to see success, first of all, it takes time in our changing from totalitarian regimes to democratic regimes. It's a painful long-term process, and as leaders, I think we have to have our hands in both places. One in building good leadership, but the other one in really doing whatever it takes to change the environment, change the context, clean the waters in a sense of the fishbowl.
Yeah,
So
Silvio, good input. Silvio is a trained engineer. You know, in the days in Romania when he went to university, you could not train in social science. You had to do something else. They didn't allow philosophy or sociology or political science. So he trained as an engineer and later on did a PhD in philosophy. So you can see the combination working here. So it's about being practical. It's about getting things done. It's a bias for action, while simultaneously going through the process of legitimizing things and building a democratic ethos. It's not only about talking, it's also about doing. It's about cleaning up. It's about, I visited Silvio and one of their trajectories in Romania, which they tried to implement under the time of Ceausescu, was to build chemical industries, and they're still suffering ecologically from experiments which didn't consider transition and went completely wrong. So toxic, really toxic environments in their society. So clean up means cleaning up in many ways. It's an intellectual, philosophical, but also a very implementation-based and a very practical job to do. Get your hands dirty, get it done, do something. Bias for action. Thanks, Silvio. For a philosopher, you are quite a hard worker as well. Robert, I see an indication that you want to come in. Robert is involved with social innovation in the province and doing a great job there, the province of the Western Cape. Robert is also an alumnus of mine. And I say it to him, I also say it to other people, he's probably one of the brightest alumni that I have. So this is a meant compliment. It's really seriously meant. Okay, Robert, go for it.
Goodness. Thank you, Prof. It's good to see you again. It's been a while, as you said on your email, maybe a little bit too long, but yes, you kind of, I feel a little bit set up now on my comments. No, but thank you. I appreciate your very kind words. I do appreciate that. And hello to everybody. I know I don't think I know anybody on the call, but Prof, I don't have a direct response to your 5 questions. While they're very relevant, so no issue with the questions. But if I may, I just have 3 maybe comments to make, and I'll try and be brief because I know there's quite a few people on the call. The first is maybe your thoughts. So it's maybe a question to you because I was listening to what you're saying and looking at your model. But what I'm starting, I mean, I personally think we have a tremendous crisis of leadership at many levels, if not all levels, you know, that I'm looking at. But as I look at it and observe from the side, I've started asking myself, what's the relationship between, or not the relationship, but the relevance of ego and personality and intent when it comes to leaders or leadership? Because I think that for me, I see it playing a huge role in the kind of leadership that's emerging and the kind of personalities that are emerging. And I think that for me, it's a big question, which often I haven't come across people addressing that in the context of leadership. So I would like your thoughts on those 3, ego, personality, and intent would be helpful. The second is that I do think that context matters a lot, a tremendous deal. I mean, it links to some of your questions as whether leaders are born, where they come from, how they develop, but I do think context matters a lot. And so this is more just to agree with what's been said earlier. I mean, context in terms of your environment, but context also in terms of the people that you surround yourself with as a leader, and then context as into whom or what you are leading. because that influences things to a tremendous degree, I believe. So context, I think, really is. It's kind of like you're the leader might be this you like to think of a sculptor, but context is something that chips away, or you allow to chip away, and it shapes you over time. And from this piece of material, you emerge, but you get chipped away over time. And sometimes it shapes in a beautiful way, but sometimes it also throws things out of balance. And the last one is actually with reference to your leadership model. And this is more of a thought, and I wish I was a little bit more gifted technologically. but when I look at your model, the one with the arrows, the circle with the competencies, the concepts, and the heart, you know which one, the one you showed earlier. When I look at that, when I almost feel that needs to be a three-dimensional model. And I know we obviously have limitations on paper or on presentations like this, but when I look at it and I listen to what you were saying, I almost think of this three-dimensional model, and I don't know what Prof, you might know the name. Those old big tops used to spin it like that, and it used to, depending on your skill and technique.
Robert?
Sorry?
The gyros.
Yes. Yes. So those things, I know it's in a two-dimensional view now, but in a three-dimensional model, depending on context, on time, on influence, on your personality, ego, I think leaders have to have a little bit of all those things in the spectrum. And then at a certain point, the degree to which you draw on those skill sets, or your style, or your values, depends very much on how fast that top is spinning, and whether you need to be more decisive, or be more inclusionary, or be more autocratic. So I think all those I would love to be able to develop that into that gyroscope, because a three-dimensional view actually would be probably a bit more what's the word, for me at least, appropriate, yes, because I think it is very complex, and there is probably no one thing that defines or answers the question. So maybe one day when we have the technology, we can work on a 3D model of that. But anyway, that's more of a comment. But thank you very much. It's been very thought-provoking, and that's it from me for now, Prof. Thank you.
Okay, if I can just comment. First of all, Robert, I continuously try to collect. I try to collect metaphors and analogies. I have never thought about the gyroscope, but I can just see the value of that. I've worked with things such as, for example, the what is that where you have all of the elements, but you turn and you get a new view. What's the name of that toy? Forget now. Any case,
yeah,
I've worked with telescopes, but a gyroscope is a fascinating one. The second thing is just very briefly on personality, intent, and ego. I've been thinking quite a bit about, the link between what I will call competency and commitment. And maybe it links to the idea, I think, when you have people who are forced into positions as leaders through some form of sleight of hand, in other words, who emerge into positions through, for example, political influence, which are often the case in all transitional societies, then sometimes they are hiding their incompetence in arrogance, and it comes across as having a big ego. But a big ego in some ways is maybe supported by some kind of a feeling of strength, whereas being quite uncertain and not in any way being competent. You can become competent and humble, but you can also be incompetent and very arrogant. And that I think in a certain sense supersedes the ego part of it. So it's a complementary explanation. There are just people with very big egos as well. But I think personality-wise, a normal curve distribution would say there are not that many people with big egos. So I then start to think about the second level of hypothetical explanation of what I see in this behavior. I think these are incompetent, arrogant people. And they then play out an ego state, which is completely inappropriate. And in actual fact, if you are their leader, you know, the worst thing that you can actually have is if you lead people, is probably an incompetent, arrogant person. And then maybe then in the kind of leaders are made process, what that also then starts to cultivate is a kind of an apprenticeship. Remember, the apprenticeship of leadership is servantship. So if you work in a toxic environment where people are arrogant and incompetent, then that becomes your apprenticeship. And that then contributes to the toxicity of the systemic dimensions of the institutional system. Because everybody starts to hide their incompetence through arrogance. I'm not sure whether I'm answering you, but I think ego is one element, but there might be a number of, shall we say, individually based, personality-based issues that go beyond only the ego thing. I think it is a good explanation. And then, yeah, if you can help me, Robert, I know you underplay your technological and your creative skills to build a gyroscope model. That'll be great. But maybe, I'm not sure, Robert, whether you are master's outstanding or PhD outstanding or both. Maybe there's work to do. Okay.
So let's chat again, Prof. It's like all of the above.
Talk to me about that, because you are currently a very competent professional public servant in the best sense of the word, but you are also an academic. You should be pursuing an advanced degree. I don't want to ask the question which one. That might worsen the situation.
All of the above.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Boy, I see your hand.
Erwin, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well. Thanks, Boy.
No, thank you. Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity, and hello, participants. Good to talk to you and to get your comments. Just on question one, does leadership really matter? Listening to what Sylvia said, I'm thinking about, when I think about leadership, I'm thinking about the equivalent of a catalyst within a mixture of components. So you need some, you need a few variables. If you talk about leadership as a catalyst in society, I mean, you need a critical mass of components to get the reaction started. You need the right temperature and pressure and combination of mixtures to get the desired results. So, you know, I think good leaders are only effective within an environment that is holding a critical mass of followers, if you want, or co-workers that are adequate to meet the expectations of the leader. So it's about a combination of a lot of things to make leadership work. You can have great leaders, but if it's in a toxic environment, as you say, you'll definitely not have the results that you're looking for. But for me, a unique and outstanding characteristic of a leader is someone who takes initiative and someone who takes responsibility. Quite often you see very smart people, very well equipped with traits and behaviors, etc., and they don't have the initiative to take the first step forward. They don't have the vision. But for me, initiative is a key aspect, and then a critical mass of like-minded people that will tap into the leadership given by the leader. And that's just one note. So often we think that leadership will emerge in a certain situation, but it doesn't happen because you might have a very smart leader, but you haven't got a critical mass of followers. And that's what I think Sylvia talks about. It takes time to implement change. So it takes time before you've got enough people educated and enough people exposed to the good of good leadership and the bad of bad leadership until you've got a critical mass of people that will get the ball rolling. Then the third question, is leadership better than management? I think it's maybe, I also see it as it's the wrong question to ask. If you think about organizations, I think broadly in terms of 3 roles, and in each of these roles, both management and leadership play a key role. If you think about institutions and organizations, you talk about pathfinding, and that is setting a vision and a strategy, but it's about pathfinding. The second key function is taking decisions, and the third one is implementation. So I think leaders are more involved with the pathfinding, looking ahead, envisioning possible and desired changes and desired futures. I think management is more about implementation, and I see a management and leadership cooperating when it's about decision making, but you find, of course, you find good management within good leadership, and you find good leadership within good management. So they are sort of holographically reflected in one into the other. So it's a combination, but the emphasis changes from pathfinding, where the leader takes the lead, and implementation, where management takes the lead with lesser emphasis from the participation of the leader. And that's just a comment or two, Erwin.
Thanks, Boy. I'm not sure. I think I've had 2 hands. So it was Robert and then you. If there's anybody that I'm not seeing, please just butt in. I just want to get to Enos's question. Enos asked the Max Weber approach. Remember, Max Weber, a sociologist, looked at institutions and leadership. So there's an interesting combination which Enos captures here. The idea of charismatic leadership. I see Felicity's hand. I will get to you. Thanks, Felicity. Enos, I think there is something in being charismatic because I mean, it's just so sort of visible. If you take different types of leaders, there are some that actually does not inspire because they lack that characteristic. They lack that characteristic of charismatism. I'm not sure whether I've got the word right. On the other hand, if you combine charismatic with ego, and now I must be very careful because there may be people who have very different opinions from my assessment of leaders, you might get a Donald Trump, but you know, a combination of charisma and ego. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword. I think there's a need for balance. And just in terms of your question, I think charisma is learned, but it's learned on the basis of a particular personality, whereas balance and wisdom is also learned, but learned from a different type of personality. So I don't want to argue against charismatic leadership. I would just be careful that, you know, that becomes the ideal, and that it becomes in some ways sort of once again an approach to leaders as heroes. Leaders should be essentially, in my approach, sort of not heroes per se. They can be heroic in terms of having a moral stand and being ethical, but they shouldn't be the superhero, having a lot of oozing charisma. They should in actual fact be fairly humble and serving. So just a couple of comments. Thanks, Enos, for that input. Felicitate, is that pronounced correctly?
Yeah, it's well pronounced.
Please go ahead. Thanks.
It's well pronounced. I am thankful, and I think I must be very honest to say it was finally a very good idea that Professor Busha had no time so that I step in and grasp all this knowledge, all these informations that are very important for me today. And you were just talking about charismatic leadership, and I come from a context of Cameroon where politically we were raised, and we are still being raised, with only this perspective that leadership is about domination. It's about one idea, it's about one person making the decisions and the expected obedience of the other people. It's almost 40 years that we have, I think it's now the oldest president in the world. And in this context, even the church institution from which I come from, we have this type of hierarchical leadership, which is very strong. And I quite remember when I finished my master's studies in 2015 year, I said something prophetic, and I said, this church will soon be broken into pieces because we, the younger generations, we don't fit into this type of leadership. And effectively, we are having a post-electoral dilemma since 2017. And we are working on, we are expecting, how is a transition supposed to come? And in this, how are leaders, I don't know, how is a new form of leadership developed in such a hierarchical structure and in this form of, I don't know even how to qualify it, in this form of leadership that fails to arouse new, maybe successors, if I can say, because I don't see myself being the successor of the current president of my church, because I would not know where to start from and how to start. How then is competence, our competencies, capacity, and even ego and personality supposed to play a role in such an atmosphere? It was just a question.
Yeah, okay. As it happens, Felicite, I think there are so many things here around the one question that I posed, whether there is something to learn from bad leadership. Now, it's a very expensive lesson. But let me quickly roll down on my shared screen here. I hope you can see it. I'm still impressed by this particular quote, which links to some of the things that you said. If I can just quickly, the bias for action is here, and then I said thinking, observation. These are competencies. This is all in the short piece that I supplied you with, which I wrote not only for this purposes. Now I just have to close this, otherwise I can't read it properly. The impact of the good and bad leaders, the hierarchical, maybe ego-based, charismatic leaders who think that they are above the law, they don't have to serve, they become self-serving. And this is a quote which I read: good leaders globally guide governments of nation states to perform effectively for their citizens. They deliver high security for the state and the person, a functioning rule of law, education, health, and a framework conducive to economic growth. They ensure effective arteries of commerce and enshrine personal and human freedoms. They empower civil society and protect the environmental commons. Crucially, good leaders also provide their citizens with a sense of belonging to a national enterprise of which everyone can be proud. They knit rather than unravel their nations and seek to be remembered for how they have bettered the real lives of the ruled rather than the fortunes of the few. Now the opposite, less benevolent, even malevolent leaders deliver far less by way of performance. Under their stewardship, roads fall into disrepair, currencies depreciate, and real prices inflate. Health services weaken, life expectancy slump, people go hungry, schooling standards fall, civil society becomes more beleaguered, the quest for personal and national prosperity slows, crime rates accelerate, and overall security becomes more tenuous. Corruption grows, funds flow out of the country into hidden bank accounts, discrimination against minorities and occasionally even majorities becomes prevalent. Civil wars begin. So there you can see the difference in what good leaders do for the people and what bad leaders do essentially for themselves. And it doesn't only impact on their lives, especially where they have lots of power and influence. This is what we see happening then. I see there's somebody indicating on the chat function something. Felicity, that quote I think is perhaps something that we can put up to measure. If we start to study leadership, then we can operationalize these concepts in PhDs and masters and say, if we measure these things, because it's not only about what the leader does, it's also about the outcomes of that leadership. And it's very clear that the outcomes of bad leadership is substantively worse than the outcomes of good leadership for everybody concerned. And we should start talking about this because it's necessary. Gerrit says, the common goal, you can differ from other groupings or political orientations. It's the common goals. You need to find a joint purpose. Now, in a national state, I think we also have difficulties with diversity, but we should have the common purpose of serving the needs of all of the others. We tend to focus, especially in very diverse states, on serving the purpose and the goals of the own and the self. And serving the self and the own inside a group is very much linked to some of these particular issues. Put yourself into the position of the other. The golden rule is still the golden rule, is do unto others as you want done unto yourself. Okay, it's now 5:30. I see I've virtually succeeded in keeping the class together. A couple of people said they had to go a bit earlier, but we are still a substantive amount of people. Maybe we can just take a short, and I know that after that then some people might have left. I'm in actual fact just going to stretch my own legs because I feel a bit constrained here. Literally 5 minutes. If we can make it on all of our clocks 5:40 back here, and then we can start concluding. And I hope to spend only 10 minutes on a set of conclusions, and then we'll all be finished by about 10 to 6. So as I said, I just need to quickly, my smart watch says I must move. So I'm going to just stop and mute and then be back at 22. If you have to leave in the meantime, thanks for attending. Those who can come back at 22, I promise we'll be finished much later than 10 to 6. Much appreciated. I just need to stretch my legs a bit. Okay, we have a substantive number of you left, which I sincerely appreciate. Thank you so much. I thought I will introduce our conclusion with what I think represents a fairly challenging philosophical question linked to very practical professional application. I actually raised this question in a discussion last night with a group of people on the South African budget. And the question is about the role of leaders in society and leadership in society to look at the macro elements of a society which combines politics, economics, sociology, and technology as but one, and maybe even ecology. So the question then arises, given where we are currently in the world globally, what would be the really big question to ask to policymakers, to business people, to governments, to corporates, to civil society organizations? And the question that I pose as a let's say the higher grade question perhaps, is a question of what are we going to do in societies under conditions of poverty, inequality, and joblessness, and I think increased scarcity, less to go around and more people who want to share in what is going to go around. Then I think the question becomes for leaders, global leaders, from all sectors of society, all spheres of government. The question becomes, how do we create, if you want, prosperity? Or if you want to use the Harvard terms, public value. How do we create public value? Or if you want to use the Adam Smith term, how do we create welfare or wealth? Wealth is perhaps the better word. The wealth of nations. How do we create wealth? That's an important question. If we don't create wealth, we probably will be increasingly suffering from global pandemic scarcity. But it's not only about creating wealth. It's also about sharing wealth. If we think we can get by under conditions of poverty, inequality, and unemployment by just having the productive forces of society create wealth and in some ways accumulate that wealth without sharing it, then I think we underestimate probably the pushback, if not revolutionary, dynamics of societies. So we don't only have to think about how do we create wealth or public value or prosperity. We also are going to have to think through how do we share wealth? How do we share prosperity? And then, of course, you can do that in a good way or in a bad way. Now, I prefer to then stick to my model and say we should therefore be thinking about how do we create wealth and share wealth effectively. So with the least wastage and the most efficiency, the best planned. So creating and sharing wealth effectively. But also we should think about how do we create and share wealth ethically without exploiting people or overutilizing the ecology, without overconsumption. That then gives us an interesting perspective, a conceptual model again, perhaps to work on in another way, where we say that we can put on the horizontal axis ethical and effective, like you have seen in my leadership model, ethical and effective leaders, ethical and effective societies. How do we create wealth effectively and ethically? And on the vertical axis, we can put how do we share wealth effectively, and ethically. So then you've got a 4-cell typology. If you want a cross, where at the top end of the vertical axis, it says create. At the bottom end of that axis, it says share. To the left on the horizontal side says effectively, and to the right, ethically. Maybe we should turn that around, because ethically is always somehow seemingly, rightly or wrongly, equated to the left. To the right, effectively. Doesn't matter really. Now you've got 4 cells. You can see it. Can you see it in your imagination? Can you draw it? Create, share, vertical axis, ethically, horizontal axis, effectively. Then I think leaders should be starting to think. If you are in a small congregation in a church, or you're teaching in a technical college, or you're working in a government department, or you're driving a very, very ambitious business, then you should start to think, what ideas do I have to create wealth effectively and to share it ethically? What institution should I create to share wealth ethically and effectively? In each of these 4 cells, you can then start to populate the 4 cells with appropriate leadership behavior, which will perhaps avoid you from getting into that type of leadership where civil wars emerge. And it is not only politicians that contribute to civil wars. Civil society organizations do as well if they are badly led. Political parties as civil society organizations can do it for the worse. Businesses can do it if they become completely exploitative and corrupt. So you must then start to think through what are the ideas, the institutions, and the implementation plans in each of these 4 cells of the typology. For what you are doing. I know, for example, Oki is involved quite a bit with work with us on peace and reconciliation. How do we create that value proposition in each of the 4 cells to share that wealth of knowledge in ways which is effective and ethical, creates it and also shares it? That has to do with things such as pricing, things such as delivery. It can be very philosophical, but can also be very practical. I think that's a question that we need to start discussing. Now, in conclusion, before I give you a chance to once again input, what I've opened here is the second version of our course pack, a part of the course pack, to just give you an indication of what are the things that we will be covering in the bigger course, more of these things. We will also be focusing not only on leadership, but also on social innovation and social entrepreneurship and social businesses. But for the purposes of the leadership part, we will be looking at the things that we talked about today, and then we will focus on things such as leadership activities, leadership building, leadership games and exercises. Obviously, we can't do that in complete detail, but this document and the course pack document is a similar resource document. We will look at things such as the emotionally intelligent leader, building emotional intelligence into our leadership toolkit. I can open that now, but I don't have time. This will be covered as we go along. We will be focusing on how do we cultivate wisdom in the workplace? For example, by looking at a site about the 5 ways in which great leaders cultivate wisdom. We will be looking at wise leadership in terms of a Harvard piece in Harvard Business Review on the big ideas on wise leadership. We will look at change models and at John Kotter, things such as his YouTube videos, and then Rothberg, which we already referred to. So this, in a certain sense, what we did today must serve as a form of an appetizer for people who may be interested in encouraging their colleagues and friends and or themselves to perhaps engage with us in a further conversation about and on leadership, and to deal with simultaneously the bigger philosophical questions, but also the very practical and very important real things that we have to do practically on the ground to improve the lives of people. That then concludes this short essentials approach to leadership. From my perspective, there are many other perspectives as well. And I hope that there might be opportunities for us to engage further in the future. For now, I conclude and I ask you whether there are any of you who might want to come in with a couple of parting shots. We will promptly end at the latest at 6 o'clock as planned. That is part of good planning. Okay, anybody? In Afrikaans, we say, maybe in Afrikaans, which I will translate freely just now, we say, ek het julle toegespreek. I've actually closed you down, perhaps. I do get often the comments that I'm somewhat concept rich, and I try to work on it, but yeah, it's unfortunately one of those things that sometimes I have to do. All right, anybody that wants to come in?
Erwin?
Yes, please, I'm listening.
Yes, it's Gerard again. I must say you have the ability to make short statements and then actually open up the mind and trigger.
Excuse me that I'm interrupting. Somehow I have difficulty in hearing you. Could you kindly just, maybe I should just increase my sound levels as well. But if you could just get a bit closer to your mic facility, because it's a bit hard to hear you.
Okay, Erwin, I'm on my Bluetooth earphones, so I don't know if that's the problem.
Good, that's much better.
Okay, so yes, as I started, I was saying that you have the good ability to make short statements and then open up the mind to such a level that you start thinking the global financial impact on poorer countries by implication, and then the poorer countries by return implication, having the opportunity to have an effect on the global economy, creating job opportunities, creating economy, and so forth. So yes, that really is my closing remark, and I'm actually looking forward to the next couple of sessions. And thank you very much for the colleagues joining us. Thank you, Erwin.
Thanks. As always, Gerard, you have a very nice way of contributing and commending, and sometimes even correctly, a bit constructively critical as well. I like your balance. Much appreciated. Right. Any other parting shots?
Prof, it's Enos here.
Hi, Enos.
Prof, I like the continuum that you presented on leadership.
Yes.
Are we together on that one, where you are referring to strategic leadership? It's very informative, but I'm struggling to sort of, in my mind, agree that it is a continuum and therefore it doesn't have a beginning, right? But at the same time, I want to see, as you move in that continuum, if you could slot continuous learning as well as part of that process. I think that will be quite helpful.
Yes, just to say, yeah, as I said, we spent lots of time together in the 80s, 70s, well, no, late 80s, early 90s, and we still shared ideas.
Continuum. B-U-T.
I'm not sure why.
Sorry for that. Sorry for that. Let me just.
Okay. So what I want to say is that in actual fact, that whole idea of the action learning model is a kind of a reflective practice which goes in some ways towards an attitude of continuous learning for the individual. So therefore, it's reflective practice. Everybody must practice it as far as I'm concerned. I try to do it after the session. I will at least, while I make the food in our house, so while I'm cooking, I will think about what happened, why, what can I learn from this, and how do I build the learning back into the system. So that's a very personal to holder kind of approach to continuous learning. And then, of course, the whole idea of, institutionalizing that. That's why I thought, let me start with a 2-hour session, then maybe involve people in further activities around this, and then build up a kind of a academic career path which ends in maybe doing all of the short courses, getting that prior learned, recognized, and then in that way, perhaps get the advanced diploma, and then do the research for the MPhil. Like you did so many years ago for your MPA at Liverpool. So yeah, continuous learning is just part of what I've always been involved with, and which we share and which we do, I think, individually and institutionally. So thanks for that. I see now 4 chats. Let me just see if there's something. Good, that's your point, Enos. And you also put it in writing. All right, so maybe we can conclude, unless there's somebody else with a need to speak. I recently came across the following quote about leadership, and there are many. There are millions of quotes. This one just interesting in the sense that it says leadership is like beauty. It is also somewhat in the eyes of the beholder. Not all beauty is or the assessment, the aesthetics of beauty is not necessarily always shared, but people do see beauty. And we may see different versions of beauty, and that's fine. So leadership is about like a bit like that kind of contextualized, rich idea of beauty. There's not only one type of beauty, there are different types of beauty. It is, however, possible to recognize it, to see it, but it's very difficult to describe. I think maybe that's my parting comment. I hope I made, and it seems as if at least some of the feedback that I get, which I appreciate, is that I have made an honest attempt to describe the beauty of leadership, and there are different beauties there. But it is difficult to describe what leadership is. And I thank you all for your inputs. And maybe Boy says the quality of leadership and the quality of followership is closely linked to the quality of our thinking and our mind models. So there you are. It's also about mindsets and mind models. 1 minute to 6. I will now be going into the kitchen and preparing some food. And I will be thinking about the session and about you. Many of you are good friends, older friends, newer friends. Please let us keep contact and contact us if there's anything that we can contribute towards your work, and you will always contribute towards our work as well. I have recorded this meeting. Might be possible to share it on, it won't be shareable on email, on WeTransfer. If people ask for it, we'll try to do that. In the meantime, please consider joining us for further conversations on leadership in all of the platforms that we have. I thank you and goodbye. Have a great evening, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Prof. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Yes, bye, everybody.
Bye. Yes.
Ciao.
Bye, Felicity.
Bye, Prof. Thank you so much.
Bye, Felicity. Bye.
Bye.